Hello everyone! Today we're venturing into Greek mythology as I cross another film off my to-do list. And this time it's available to everyone, it's on Tubi, and I think it's currently on YouTube. Let's talk about the epic Ray Harryhausen adventure from 1963, Jason and the Argonauts. When Pelias comes to conquer King Aristo of Thessaly, an oracle warns that his victory will last but 20 years, at which point one of Aristo's 3 children will avenge him and take back the throne. Pelias goes to war anyway, determined to slay the children himself so the prophecy can't come true. Aristo's eldest daughter Briseis, not to be confused with the character in the Iliad, brings her baby sister Philomela to Hera's temple and begs for mercy. There she is killed by Pelias, who is then told by a priestess, the goddess Hera in disguise, that it is the son Jason who has escaped that will destroy him. Up on Mount Olympus, Hera is offended by the violent desecration of her temple and makes a bargain with her husband Zeus, who concedes that she may intervene on Jason's behalf 5 times. 20 years later, Jason, through Hera's manipulation, saves Pelias' life, but he doesn't know this is the man he's after. To get rid of him, crafty Pelias tells Jason that in order to reclaim his kingdom, he must take a ship and travel to the end of the world to obtain the Golden Fleece. Thus, the journey begins. I first saw Jason and the Argonauts years ago in my 9th grade English class. Why we were watching it, I'm not really sure. We had read The Odyssey and then watched the 1997 Armand Assante miniseries, which was decent. And then because we read a chunk of Edith Hamilton's mythology, and because my teacher liked to waste class time, he played Jason and the Argonauts as well. Was it necessary? No. Was it relevant? Barely. Did I have issues with the way that class was run? Yes. I consider this and 1981's Clash of the Titans to be Harryhausen's most popular stop-motion works. But I've got to admit, Jason and the Argonauts, not a favorite. I went into it with enthusiasm. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be so nostalgic. But it turns out most of what I remembered were the best parts, the famous ones, the Statue of Talos and the sword-wielding skeletons. Those sequences are awesome, and they absolutely hold up. I've watched them separately multiple times. The rest of the movie, it's okay. I feel like I just heard someone yell, "What? Just okay?" I'm not a huge Greek mythology fan. I've been more into it at other times in my life, like when I was a kid and in 9th grade, and I got into it again on a more sophisticated level when I read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and some other works for a classical lit class. I did enjoy all of those. I cried reading the Iliad. So there have been times when I was well-versed in the pantheon of gods and the heroes and all of that. Unfortunately, I think my memory has dumped a lot of that knowledge to make room for other things, so this was a little rough for me at first, but as names and places were mentioned, I did feel like, okay, it's all coming back to me now. More than that, though, I don't love the characters. Todd Armstrong stars as Jason, and he's fine. He leads the film, he's the protagonist. Jason is brave, strong, cunning, athletic, pretty much the ideal epic hero. He's a bit defiant of the gods, but they're playing a literal game with his life, so that's understandable. I don't have any issue with Jason. He's not bad. I just never found him that interesting. And I would say the same about a lot of the other characters. They're there, they do their thing, they say the lines. They're not particularly engaging lines of dialogue, and the characterizations are pretty basic, and that's fine. It's not a character-driven adventure, but it felt lacking to me. I did recognize Lawrence Naismith as Argos the shipbuilder. He was in another Harryhausen film, 1969's The Valley of Gwangi. And the one who makes the strongest impression is Hercules. I did remember him, mainly because he's such a ham. He's played by Nigel Green, who I did not recognize here as this loud, brash, hairy guy. I remember the kids in my English class found his acting pretty hilarious. Hercules here is goofy and not all that bright. He's basically a lunk in a loincloth. And while we're on the subject, we do see an awful lot of sweaty, grimy, half-naked guys here. The two main female characters are Hera and Medea. The goddess Hera, who dominates the first half, is played by Honor Blackman, and Medea, who dominates the second half, is played by Nancy Kovac. Jason fishes her out of the sea after her ship is destroyed. She claims to be a dancer in the Temple of Hecate and offers to help him get the fleece. When they reach her home, it turns out she's actually the High Priestess, performing a sensual temple dance in heavy exotic makeup. There's always a little va-va-voom in these Harryhausen movies, at least the color ones. King Aeetes has set a trap for Jason, but Medea helps him escape and leads him to the fleece, where he must fight the Hydra while she stands by and reacts. At the end of the movie, Jason and Medea kiss, and Hera, watching from Olympus, looks a little jealous, but Zeus tells her to let them have their moment, as he has more plans for Jason. I don't know if this led to any speculation about a sequel back in the day, but I do remember enough Greek mythology to recall that the rest of this story isn't very pretty. Jason and the Argonauts is loosely based on the Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes. In the Argonautica, Medea actually kills her brother in order to help Jason escape. But her most famous appearance is in the play Medea by Euripides. It's set about 10 years after these events, and Jason abandons his wife, Medea, for another woman, leading Medea to get revenge by murdering their two sons, murdering her and Jason's two sons, and his bride. So it's definitely not a they all lived happily ever after situation. Now, some other accounts have her killing her own children by accident, but regardless, Medea is an intriguing and somewhat notorious figure in Greek mythology. And over the years, she has been interpreted in many different ways, sometimes sympathetically, sometimes not sympathetically. This version of her, which I grant tells just a fraction of her story, is probably the most bland. That said, they only have so much time to show Medea developing such a passion for Jason that she would betray everything to help him, and they do an adequate job. We do see a glimmer of Medea's intensity when she prays to Hecate for Jason's deliverance. In the Argonautica, her ardor is actually the result of a love spell, another manipulation of the gods, so she is compelled by forces outside of herself. In the film, her monologue alludes to her inner turmoil over something she doesn't fully understand. I just wish there was a little more for those of us in the audience who know the rest of the story. So, those are some things I feel lukewarm about. But those special effects, they deliver, and that is what most people are watching the movie for. You do have to wait a while to get the goods. The first part of the film has plenty of effects, but not those signature Harryhausen stop-motion effects. It's not until 32 minutes in that we get our first dazzling animation sequence with the statue of the Titan Talos coming to life and pursuing the Argonauts as they attempt to flee Hephaestus' island. The animation is great, the stop-motion movement actually seems fitting, I love the detail on the model, the sound design is effective as well, and I have always remembered that bloody fluid that comes gushing out of the heel. I also really like the sequence with the harpies, where Jason and company rescue an old blind man who can't eat because these two pests, sent by Zeus as punishment, keep stealing his food. I told you I was rusty on my mythology. When these things first showed up, I was like, are those the Furies? But then a couple seconds later I was like, no, harpies! And that was correct. Haven't completely lost it. They kind of remind me of the flying blue vampire ladies from Van Helsing, maybe crossed with Mystique from X-Men. I wasn't so impressed with the Clashing Rocks sequence, where the Argo is rescued by a giant merman god thing. Apparently, in the original story, Jason gets them through by sending a bird ahead to be crushed by the rocks. I can see why they changed that for a kids' movie. The Golden Fleece is very pretty, at least as long as they have it lit up so it sparkles and shines. When they take that effect off of it, then it's like, ooh, doesn't look like much, does it? And I've gotta say, The Hydra jump scare got me good. This sequence was probably a chore to animate with all those heads. It does remind me of Philip fighting the dragon at the end of Sleeping Beauty. They're even killed the same way. But as far as heroes go, Jason doesn't hold a candle to Philip. Not in my book. And then for the climax, King Aeetes summons the children of the Hydra's teeth, skeletons equipped with weapons and armor who emerge from the ground to battle Jason and his comrades in the film's coolest and most iconic scene. It is reminiscent of the climax of 1958's The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, another Harryhausen film, which I reviewed last year, but skeletons coming to life will always be creepy, with their menacing grins and their apparent invincibility, and here, instead of 1, you have 7. A few years ago, I saw a video on YouTube, which I've put a link to in the description, titled, "What if Jason and the Argonauts had smoother stop motion?" It takes clips of Talos and the skeletons and increases the frame rate from 24 frames per second to 120 frames per second, which renders their movements more fluid. The result is fascinating, and technically it's an improvement, but I felt it made it look more computer-generated, and I think you lose some of the charm and the sense of painstaking craftsmanship. Jason and the Argonauts is a fun adventure. It's classic swords and sandals stuff coupled with that unique Harryhausen flair, plus a rousing score by Bernard Herrmann. I may wish that the characters and the dialogue were a little more engaging, that relationships were more compelling, but there's no denying the film is lively, colorful, bright, immersive, and the special effects sequences are still excellent. And those are my thoughts on Jason and the Argonauts. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear what you think about this movie, so please share your take on it in the comments below, and I'll be back with a new review next Saturday. Thanks for watching.